It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. Kavanaugh. It's not looking good for Brett. Not looking good for Brettsy at all. Look, not looking good for the Republican Party as a whole. The more you look at they're really trying to ram this nominee through. They're really trying to poo-poo this whole thing away. They're really trying to minimize and distract and really disgrace. I mean, it's really just disgraceful what we've seen. And Susan Collins, again, to me, right out on the front of the "are you kidding me" scale. The idea that, and I don't know where she dreamed this up. Before the hearing, let's just have a cross-examination session. Let's have Kavanaugh's lawyer grill Dr. Ford, and let's have Dr. Ford's lawyer grill Kavanaugh, so we can have a little spectacle. And look, there's part of me that goes, this is Susan Collins attempting to save the Republican Party from themselves. This is another, in my very, very limited ability to say this. This is another example of a woman attacking another woman. This is an example of, in my view, and you can disagree with me if you think I'm wrong, but this is one of those moments where she's providing cover, she's providing shade for the old white guys on the committee who are going to make themselves look stupid. There is going to be an Arlen Specter moment. There's going to be the "are you sure you weren't fantasizing" moment. You know it's coming. And I look at this as Susan Collins going, well, you know, the attorneys will cross-examine, and they do what attorneys do, which is very different than asking questions in a hearing, a congressional hearing. This isn't a court of law where your only hope is to change a couple of jurors, where you're really trying to influence those 12 people sitting on the jury. This is about actually getting to the truth and not asking the kind of questions we know are coming. And there's a reason Dr. Ford hasn't yet said that she's going to show up on Monday, if Monday happens. Because there's part of me that goes, at some point the Republicans are going to have to, some adult in the room is going to have to step forward and say, look, we're not capable of doing this well. Move Kavanaugh along, bring in someone else. Bring in the crazy conservative right-wing woman on the court who was even more adamant that she wanted to do away with Roe than Kavanaugh appears to be. It just seems to me that would be the smart thing to do. But, honestly, the smart thing to do would be to reach out to the Democrats and go, okay, hey, give us a list of some people that you think would be acceptable to us. Still conservative, still off on the corporate, give cash to the CEOs and the billionaires side, and still screwing workers and all of that stuff. But, a little more moderate towards the center. That would be how things should be. And if we had a 60 vote rule, that may happen. But today is one of those interesting kind of days where things just kind of worked out. I don't know if you saw it, but in 10 cities across the U.S., you had McDonald's workers, taking to the streets over sexual harassment, because there were a number of claims. Back in May, employees, came forward and said, "Hey, McDonald's is not doing anything to protect us." They filed claims with the EEOC, the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, and good luck getting anything out of the Trump EEOC, by the way. And McDonald's evidently drugged their feet, didn't do anything about providing a safe workplace for women. So they took to the streets in 10 cities, Chicago, Kansas City, St. Louis, LA, Miami, Milwaukee, New Orleans, Orlando, San Francisco, and Durham. I'm kind of curious why Philadelphia, New York, Cleveland, why those cities weren't on the list as well. But here's the thing. It's interesting to me that on this day, while we're talking about Kavanaugh, we're talking about this, going back to the Anita Hill days, and look at how we've done nothing in 27 years on this issue, that it's workers stepping forward and saying, we've had enough. And I'm telling you, we're going to see a lot more of this in the coming weeks and months. We're going to see a lot more of the desperation class saying, you know what, we've had enough. And I've been waiting for this, and I've been talking about this for years. Why is it that women don't stand up and in a very loud way say enough is enough? Why do women put up with it? And look, there's a ton of reasons. And as a privileged white male, I maybe I don't understand. But at some point, we've got to make a space where our daughters, our wives, our mothers, the women in our lives are safe and protected in the workplace, and respected and valued, and not treated this way. I mean, the first thing, and look, I'm almost as guilty as well. When the anonymous letter came out, my first thought was I question anything done anonymously, just like I questioned the letter coming out of the Trump White House. But as soon as this woman came forward and said, "This is my story," I believed her. And I believed her because there's nothing to gain here. And immediately you saw the right-wing spin machine. Immediately you saw Republicans going after her, coming up with this fantasy story, which, because, if someone's going to make something up, there's going to be a reason for it. So we got to find that thing that would be plausible, that the average person would go, yeah, that sounds reasonable. Focus group tested, think tank approved kind of messaging. Well, this time they came up with, in a short period of time, kind of not, a couple of months, that evidently this woman's, Dr. Ford's parents, were going through foreclosure back in the 90s. And Brett Kavanaugh, who told us that he was, he grew up in poverty, he was poor and grew up in a crime area, and it was a war zone, and it was horrible. His mother, who was a court judge, a bankruptcy judge, worked on, Dr. Ford's parents' case. The claim is that she took their house from them, kicked them to the curb, which isn't true. But, that doesn't stop them. Truth doesn't matter to these folks. And they've told us this all along. The alternative facts people have told us all along that truth doesn't matter. And we're seeing that playing out right before us. Kavanaugh has taken the Clarence Thomas view. I don't know that he's going to have the great punchline like a high-tech lynching, but I'm expecting the same kind of denial. I'm expecting the same kind of indignity. How dare she besmirch my integrity and who I am by telling her little story. I'm waiting for nothing good coming out of Monday. If Monday happens, and this is, like I said, the other point of this, I'm hopeful that the smart folks don't subject this woman to this kind of just public abuse, which is what it's going to be. This is going to be another assault. And I guess this is what we do to women, isn't it? When something horrible happens to them, then it's their fault. And it's nothing new, whether it's in the workplace or socially or wherever. It just seems to be how it is. And maybe we change this. Maybe by having workers taking to the streets and saying enough already. Maybe by saying, you know, when women come forward that we believe them. Maybe that helps change things a little bit. And maybe my daughters don't have to fight these battles that my parents and my grandparents' generation fought. Maybe, like everything, we make things a little bit better. Maybe we leave a better place. And maybe by not having someone like Brett Kavanaugh sitting on the court deciding issues that impact women's health, their lives, maybe this is a start in saying, you know what, enough is enough already. It's just one of those things. So today, going to spend a little bit of time talking about, you know, hey, how should men deal with this? Look, as a white male, I don't understand. Honestly, I can't put myself in those shoes. I can't tell you what it's like. I can't give you, you know, the feelings and the emotion and the stressors and the anxieties and everything that I've read comes with this. But, you know, and it's my mentality that if something like this were to happen, that I would lash back, that I would want retribution, I would want punishment, I would want people to pay, I would want people to know. Just kind of one of those things that makes me think about it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Tell me what you think. And also, what do you think of the McDonald's strike? This is fantastic stuff. The people of the Fight for 15 folks have organized this, and it's going to continue until McDonald's does something. And this is another one of those weird moments where, you know, it's the franchisees. McDonald's are saying, oh, well, you know, it's not our problem. Not our problem. It's down the road. It's those franchisees. Again, another reason I believe we do away with the whole franchise model. And if you've got the big M out front, you work for the big M. You don't work for a subcontractor or someone who's just leasing the big M. Just kind of my thought. Again, love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Ben Jackson's going to be here to share some thoughts on the Kavanaugh hearings and what we should be seeing, doing, and all of that. Quick break. Right back. Racial unionism. The press, of course, vilified the strikers, red-baiting their union leaders and extolling the virtues of the company for bringing progress to the island. But the union won big. They reestablished pattern bargaining lost in an earlier strike. They also secured additional wage increases, dues collection, seniority rights, inexpensive housing, and medical coverage. Importantly, there were contract provisions that addressed mechanization and de-skilling of work. The union was finally in a position to change unfair job classifications, winning higher pay for the jobs that required operation of new machinery. What the union could not control in the long run was what Valdez referred to as the runaway plantation. By the 1970s, employment had plummeted as companies fled union fields for cheaper land and labor in Thailand and the Philippines.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Well, it has certainly been an interesting couple of days. And look, if you needed a reason, I mean, honestly, if you needed a reason to want to vote come November, I'll tell you, I'm looking at some of the insanity that we're seeing going. There's a bunch of reasons why you should be checking your registration, making sure that you're eligible to vote, and then come November, getting out and marching to the polls and throwing a lot of these bums out, especially some of the insane responses we're seeing coming out of some of these senators like Orrin Hatch. Just mind-blowing to me. And here to talk about why we need and how and all of the push to get, well, at this point, Democrats elected to add some sanity to our government and some balance. I've got Nate Lerner on the line. He is the executive director of Build the Wave. You can follow them at Twitter at Build the Wave. Nate, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, thanks so much for having me.
So, I'm looking at all of this kind of insanity that we're seeing, especially around this Supreme Court nominee, and, comparing this to the recent poll that found that like only 28% of millennials plan the vote. And I'm going, really? Seeing everything going on in Washington, seeing what this administration's done, seeing this Supreme Court nominee, only 28%? Come on.
Yeah, that poll is very concerning. We've been pushing that pretty hard to folks to make sure that, just because we saw so much from the Parkland kids, and we've seen a lot of energy from students, that does not reflect the majority. And what it's going to take is getting out there and talking to students, talking to folks who are younger, having real conversations with them to make sure they understand the importance of this election and make sure they know what's going on. Because a lot of them don't consume news the same way we do. They don't watch cable news. They're not on Facebook. They're not on Twitter. They're on Instagram and Snapchat, and they're really not getting a lot of news that way. So it's up to us to make sure that they're informed and that they're voting, and that requires getting out, knocking doors, making calls, or sending texts, which is our favorite thing.
Yeah, good old-fashioned, old school organizing, going out and actually talking to people. And I know the electronic stuff, the text as well. But I'm looking at this and going, how is it possible that you're not chomping at the bit, ready to throw some of these people out, especially, as I said, with some of the comments that have been coming out recently around the allegations surrounding Kavanaugh. I mean, come on. I'm expecting Monday when if the hearings happen, if Kavanaugh doesn't withdraw by then, I'm expecting almost like another Anita Hill moment out of some of these Republicans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking about it earlier, and it really kind of hit me. Why don't Republicans just replace Kavanaugh with another conservative? At the end of the day, their goal is not Kavanaugh. It's just to get a conservative on the bench, so they can have the moral high ground. They can do the right thing. They can respect the sanctity of our Supreme Court and of the rule of law in our country. Get him out of there. Put some other bum in there who's a conservative instead, and try to put him on the Supreme Court. But you know what? They won't, because they know that will make them look weak. They'll have to backtrack, and they might not get it done before the midterms, which could be really a nightmare for them if we take back the Senate. So they are rushing right now to get him in there. And it's just a complete disgrace and embarrassment, because they're going to put a man on there who was accused and likely committed sexual assault. And it's disgraceful. Yeah,
but, even beyond that, I mean, all of the, I talked to a friend this week who said, my teenage, son looked at them and said, looked at Kavanaugh and said, he's a real creeper. And you go, wow, virtual, that visceral instinct that kids have right there in a very simple way. And this was even before the allegations came out. And, I was saying the same kind of things, looking at that moment where the father reached his hand out to shake hands with Kavanaugh, and the look of peasant, you don't matter, just kind of grabbed me as one of these moments going, this is not somebody that I feel comfortable even anywhere near the Supreme Court, let alone sitting on it.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really been impressed with him. If he's supposed to have this great record, this impressive amount of experience, it hasn't been showing in his answers or in the way he's conducted himself, especially in light of these allegations. He really does not stand out as a strong pick or someone who should be on the highest court in the land. And I don't understand why Republicans are standing so strongly behind him when he's an embarrassment to them at this point. He was pretty disgraceful early on when he was saying that he wouldn't, or when there was a lot of evidence that that Trump had selected him because he wouldn't indict the president or call for an investigation, and he would defend him. And now we're seeing the kind of character this man has, and it's biting him in the ass as a result.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that gets me is, and you're right, it's all about, not looking weak and not backing up, as opposed to doing the right thing and doing your job. And I would, are we really at that moment where it's just really about my team winning and me? Is it really is that where we are right now?
No, I ask myself a lot, what if Democrats, somehow got a president in there like Trump, which I think we're a little too reasonable for that, but you never know. Is how would we respond? And I think, based on the way we responded with Al Franken, based on the way we responded with other Democrats in the past, we hold our representatives and our leaders accountable, and we put country before party because we tend to be a bit more level-headed. We don't fall for the same kind of fake news conspiracy theories that the Trump supporters do, and we're not that much better. We just it's just in our nature, and as a result, you're seeing extremism rise up in the conservative party much more so than on the left, and it's extremely dangerous. And at the end of the day, what matters is that, our nation is unified and moving forward, but we just keep seeing division rearing its ugly head day after day.
So you're not buying the this Professor Ford came forward simply because she was angry that Kavanaugh's mother, the judge, threw her parents out of their house and foreclosed on them. You're not buying that, even though they didn't actually get thrown out of their house. It actually worked out in their benefit. But hey, facts be damned. So you're not buying the conspiracy theory?
No, I'm not buying any conspiracy theory. I mean, everything is conspiracy theory with Republicans. If it was up to them, this would be some large thing coordinated by Dianne Feinstein and Hillary Clinton to get this woman to come out. But no, she's not someone who I think wanted to be in the spotlight. That's why she was anonymous at the beginning. That's why she didn't say anything early on. I don't think she's someone who wants to be receiving death threats right now, who wants to go down in the history books and forever be associated with this horrible incident that she's tried to move past. But I think she recognizes that as a woman, it's her responsibility to step forward and call him out, and that this is the time to do that. And I think it's extremely brave what she's done, and she should be applauded for that. And if I look at these two people, it's very clear which one of them is lying, and it's certainly not her.
So, in looking at this, and you're someone who's been around a lot of campaigns over the years, I said yesterday that it's my view that, every Democratic candidate in this country should be using Orrin Hatch's statements that he found Kavanaugh to be honest and straightforward, and that Ford, this Professor Ford, that there was some question of whether she was mixed up, which, to me, that's almost a gift that you couldn't buy that kind of a gift.
Yeah, I think I think we have to be careful. I think it's definitely a good way to mobilize folks on the left, and I think cumulatively it shows. It really paints a poor picture of Republicans when you look at all of their behavior day after day with Trump, with Kavanaugh, with the investigations that we're seeing, with Puerto Rico, with the child separation. And you just see that there's not really a lot of moral fiber or backbone or character in the party. And combined, I think that's something that we should bring to voters and say, look, this may not be on its own an issue you care about so much, but combined, it really shows you who this party is and what you're going to expect if you keep them in power for another 2 or 4 years. But I think we should still obviously talk about the issues that matter. But you know what? The Republicans aren't going to be the ones addressing those issues because they don't care about them. They're too busy doing stuff like this.
Yeah, and passing tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires.
Exactly.
Look, I mean, this is one of those times, and which is why it's distressing to me to see only 28% of millennials who are planning the vote. The hope is that that they come around and that the rest of us do, because we're at a very, very interesting time in our country. I don't know that we've ever been more divided. I guess you go back to the Civil War, maybe much more divided then, but. I look at this and we're at this really kind of crossroads moment. And I think this is one of those questions of who are we? Are we going to put this person on the Supreme Court with these allegations and all of the other questions, just tons of questions about this judge's credibility. I guess this is one of those moments that historians will look back on, and which way we go will be kind of where the country goes. Yeah.
And that's you hit the nail on the head right there. It's really, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is, respect for our country, our institutions, for the Supreme Court, for morality, for the law of the land. And if you put this man in one of the highest positions of power in the nation, and he's going to be there for a decade, what does it say about your view of our country? What does it say about your view of all those things? Nothing good. And that's why, at the end of the day, Republicans would be really smart to replace him with someone else, because they still get their conservative judge in there. But they just, they can do that without tainting the Supreme Court and everything our country stands for, because character still does matter. And what is it? What kind of message are you sending to the people of this country when you do something like that?
Yeah, I mean, if I were Trump, if I were one of the Republicans, I would be throwing you dump Kavanaugh, you have him withdraw. Hey, going to spend more time with the family. I don't want this cesspool. Whatever the argument is, send him packing down the road and pull a woman off of one of that conservative list of what 25 judges they had. There was a woman who was right at the top. That's what I would have done. Not that I want her. I think she's horrible on virtually every issue. But politically playing the game, that's what I would do.
Exactly, which is why it's so interesting, and it shows not only it shows that how little character they have, that they're more concerned with getting their way before the midterms than doing what's right and sending a clear message to the country that they're going to stand up for what's right. But we've seen this time and time again with them, with the Me Too movement. Democrats have been holding our folks accountable every single day. Well, you don't see that on the right at all. And it's a clear message about where their priorities are. And they're much more focused on the short-term political gains than, the bigger picture. And that's not how you lead a country.
I'll tell you, lead the country right into the ground. Get what I can now, because we won't be around much longer. And hopefully come November, a bunch of them will be on the unemployment line. But here's the thing. There's a lot of women running for office this year. I look at this. You got a guy in the White House who's been accused of, 20 different women have accused him of sexual assault. You've got this guy. At some point, don't the women who are the majority of this country go, you know what? You guys over on the right, you guys have screwed things up too much. We're gonna go this way for a bit. Do you see a huge swing in women voting for Democrats? Maybe.
Yeah, I think so. I think they're going to be turning out more. You're also seeing women being historically more involved than ever. Our organization has sent 750,000 text messages for a variety of candidates, especially those in the recent special elections. And the majority of our volunteers are women, who are just absolutely disgusted with what they're seeing. And they're older women who haven't been involved traditionally as much in politics. They were reliable Democrats, but they never invested too much time in volunteering and donating and in getting involved. But they've just been so disgusted by what they've seen that they have refused to stand on the sidelines and do nothing. And they have taken so much action that it's absolutely outstanding. And what's going to happen is that you're going to see across the country, you're going to see women and Democrats and young folks getting more involved than ever before. And that kind of energy is what is going to build the wave. It's not just the sentiment of voters. It's the energy in our base getting out and taking action and doing more to make sure that we turn out our base. And I would definitely encourage folks to go to buildthewave.com if they're interested in learning more about what we're doing to build the wave and how to send text messages with us for Democrats.
And to stay active and engaged, because look, I'm a big fan of participatory democracy, more direct action, more people involved, doing the door knocking and the face-to-face stuff, all of that, but also making sure our representatives know that they're actual people who care about what they're doing. And I got to think that this is going to be one of those moments when we look back at on November 7th, when the results come in, of this being a key component to what happens in November.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see a historic number of women elected to Congress, historic number of minorities as well, and that's really a good thing, because when you look at DC right now, it's always frustrating to see the sea of old white men. I think it's fine to have some old white men in there, but I think we need a Congress that, literally it's in their name, they're representatives, that is actually representative of our country. And it'd be nice to see, and especially these guys have been running our country in the ground long enough. It's going to be exciting to get some new blood in there, some fresh faces, some fresh ideas, and some new energy, and a wide array of experience too. I think we have too many folks who just are lawyers, and now we're seeing a historic number of veterans running, a historic number of educators running, and scientists, and folks with a really wide variety of backgrounds. And I think that's going to bring a whole new voice to our democracy. And all we have to do is get them in office, and I'm confident that's going to happen, but not so confident that I'm not going to be working my butt off every day to make sure it does. And I'm sure, a lot of folks on the left will be doing the same.
No, you guys are doing fantastic work, and I encourage people to go to your website, buildthewave.org, to make sure that you maybe sign up, make a donation, because at the end of the day, it's about the money. But here's the thing that gets me. One of the first things I saw against this Professor Ford is that she gave $72 to the DNC and the Democratic candidates.
Yeah, she's a big spender. Yeah, I got to look out for that. I think this is the ultimate Trump defense, is that if someone attacks him, calls him out using facts and the truth, he says they are biased because they're partisan views. It is possible, as a human to have views that are not impacted entirely by, where you stand politically, to feel or think something, or believe something and not have it be influenced by the fact that you're a Democrat or Republican. And I think this woman can absolutely come forward and accuse Kavanaugh of assaulting her when they were younger and not be influenced by politics. And what's interesting is when you look at Roy Moore, the majority of women who came out and accused Roy Moore were Trump supporters. This is an issue that goes beyond politics. Yep. It goes to morality and the core of who we are as humans and as Americans. And it's beyond frustrating that Republicans don't seem to recognize that. And yeah, they dismiss it as, this vast liberal conspiracy. And it's really shameful and disgraceful to see.
No, you're right. I mean, did they learn nothing from Roy Moore? And the answer, evidently not. Last question. Monday, do we expect Monday to happen? And if so, who's going to be the one who gives the Arlen Specter moment?
I think it certainly will. It looks like there are enough Republican senators who at least are willing to give her a chance to be heard, which is actually a little refreshing to see. I wish there were certainly more. I don't want to predict anything too soon. I think, hopefully Jeff Flake will continue to be a strong voice. This would be an opportunity for Susan Collins as well to assert herself a little bit. She's been very strong in women's issues in the past. Not so much with Kavanaugh, but this could be a chance for that to change. There's been a lot of pressure on her. But I think, this is an opportunity for Democrats, too, to really stand up and call out Republicans on the hypocrisy of all this and the way they're just looking the other way. This is a party that has just continuously turned a blind eye to so much misbehavior, not just from Trump, but his administration and their own party members. And it's just, they used to be so much about the moral high ground, and now they just have no more integrity in their party and are just looking to get short-term political gain.
Well, we'll see how this plays out. I'm hoping Kavanaugh withdraws before the hearing, so that this woman doesn't have to go through the grilling that I fear is going to come and the attacks that I fear is going to come. But we will see. But Nate, I appreciate the time. I hope folks will check out the website, buildthewave.org. You can also follow Nate at Nate Lerner at Nate Lerner.
At Nathan Lerner, yeah.
At Twitter there. Nate, I appreciate it. Always good talking with you. I appreciate
Not
the
similar,
time. I hope
but,
you'll come back and talk to us again soon.
Sexual allegations.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
You're listening to The Rick Smith. Your proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Exactly a choir boy. And,
No.
a whole bunch of the other
This is why we fight, why we lie awake. This is why we fight.
Finally, radio for the rest of us, Rick Smith.
This is a monumental disaster for our state.
Florence continues to wreak havoc and death on the East Coast.
Meteorologists in southern China warned that Typhoon Mangkhut would be the king of all storms. That was an understatement.
As the strongest storm of the year slams into the Philippines and Hong Kong. Plus,
the CEO of Columbia Gas's parent company apologized for the event.
Boston residents slowly returning after gas explosions destroy dozens of homes.
All of that and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comments.
Look at this. These rain totals are unbelievable. And the crazy thing is that this was pretty much forecasted.
Huh, that is crazy. Science. It works. Go figure. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, yes, as science predicted, Florence has been a disaster and a deadly one at that.
Yes, we are continuing to track the impacts of Hurricane Florence, now a tropical depression, extremely slow moving. It is the rainiest hurricane on record ever to hit the East Coast, and its remnants are spawning tornadoes as it moves north. It's already killed one person in a building collapse in Virginia. As we go to air, more than 32 people are confirmed dead from the storm, and hundreds are still trapped by flooding awaiting rescue. 750,000 are without electricity. North and South Carolina both set all-time state rainfall records. The winds have died down, but the catastrophic flooding risk remains, according to North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper in a Monday press conference.
The danger is still immediate. Flood waters are rising as rivers crest, and they will for days.
Transportation officials say most major roadways in North Carolina are impassable. Many rivers and creeks have shattered their records with historic flood levels, and forecasters say many will remain above flood stage for 5 days or more.
I know the sun is out in a lot of places, so people want to get out of the house, and I would just warn, be careful, because there's still a lot of water, a lot of rain to come over the next several days from this storm.
While a comprehensive damage assessment will take time, the North Carolina Pork Council on Monday announced that floodwaters have indeed inundated several hog manure lagoons in the state, with at least one breach caused by heavy rainfall. At least 2 coal ash waste impoundments owned by Duke Energy have also been inundated or breached, including one at a retired coal plant near Wilmington. It's not yet known if the toxic sludge, which contains mercury, arsenic, and other toxins, entered a nearby river. According to a court settlement in the wake of a previous coal ash spill, Duke Energy has until 2029 to close hundreds of its toxic coal ash waste sites in North Carolina.
Well, why rush? They keep spilling, they keep poisoning the water, but no hurry, I guess.
Access to Duke Energy's Brunswick nuclear power plant is cut off by floodwaters, but the good news is plant officials say grid power and backup generators are still working. In Japan, failures of those key components caused the Fukushima nuclear meltdown back in 2011.
And the plants that we're talking about at Brunswick are the very same model as those ones that failed in Fukushima.
Climate scientists say Florence's extreme rainfall was worsened by climate change. It stalled because of a high-pressure blocking pattern, which emerging research indicates is another consequence of global warming. Warming in the Arctic, in turn, appears to be altering the jet stream that pushes weather systems across the northern hemisphere. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, Super Typhoon Mangkhut, the strongest storm to hit the planet so far this year, slammed into the Philippines, killing more than 60 people, many of them in landslides, and then it moved on to hammer Hong Kong, knocking construction cranes off of buildings and causing billions in damage. Chinese officials have ordered millions of people to evacuate in southern China as Mangkhut moves north, wreaking havoc across that region. Finally, in Boston, residents are slowly being allowed to return to the homes they evacuated after multiple explosions damaged or destroyed dozens of homes in 3 communities, killing 1 person and injuring at least 20 on Thursday. In a Monday press conference, Robert Sumwalt of the National Transportation and Safety Board confirmed that overpressurization of a gas main under repair appears to have sent a surge of gas into those homes. Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker excoriated the slow response of the gas utility company Columbia Energy, which owns the pipeline system, and instead he put rival gas company Eversource Energy in charge of the disaster response and repairs. The deadly incident underscores the inherent risks of using explosive fossil fuels like natural gas and the dangers of deferred maintenance on our nation's aging infrastructure.
For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Mistakes of the bosses we must pay for. From the cities to the farmlands in trenches full of mud. 'Cause war is...
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So I got to tell you, the more I look at the Republican responses to Professor Ford coming forward, the more it looks like 1991 all over again, Anita Hill all over again, and failures of lots of politicians. I'm still remembering Arlen Specter. Can't get him. Alan Simpson, same thing. There were a bunch of them. Even Joe Biden, to be honest, I thought, dropped the ball. And my hope is come Monday, we don't see the same kind of, are you sure you're not delusional? Are you sure you're not fantasizing? Are you sure this just isn't, your Women Month thing? I'm waiting for it. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on, why this issue should be important to men. Since we seem to be the targets, I've asked Ben Jackson to come talk with us, or Dad of the Year, or Dad of the Decade, if you want to follow him on Twitter. Ben, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, always glad to talk to you.
So why is this an important issue?
Well, listen, I think the first thing that's important to say is that things that matter to women matter to men. Things that are foundational to our society, like access to healthcare, like free access to labor, like the ability to work and earn an equal wage, those are things that matter to us as a culture, as a society, as to who we are as Americans. So it's not just, these are not just things that matter to women. They're foundational to who we are as Americans, right? And I think that, you mentioned in your intro what we saw with Anita Hill in 1991, and really both sides of the political aisle were terrible to her. The hope is that in the almost 27 years since that hearing, is that we're better than we were, that we've learned. And I hope that we'll see that that's true on Monday, both in the Senate and in our culture.
I hope so.
An open question.
Yeah, I hope so. But, I got to tell you, the initial reactions that I'm seeing, Orrin Hatch yesterday just had me all sideways saying, well, even if it's true, even if Kavanaugh did this, well, we've got to, it'll be hard to put aside, who he is today. Forget about that. It's who he is today. And I struggle with that.
Yeah, I do too. And I think, obviously this is an extreme comparison, and I say this knowing that, but, I don't think he'd go back and say, oh, well, Ted Bundy only killed a bunch of people 30 years ago, right? Like, I think that, there are things that we do in our past, whether or not we have improved from them, that should be disqualifying when you bring that to the highest court in the land, when the people who lead us into the future should be above reproach on these key moral issues. And at no point in somebody's life, if they have held somebody down on a bed, put their hand over their mouth so they can't scream, turn up music so they can't be heard, and tried to sexually assault that person, or did successfully sexually assault that person through the allegations, then that person is disqualified. I mean, that shouldn't be a high bar, right? I think we can all agree that that's something that we don't want that type of person deciding what the legal system is going to bring for all of us.
Right.
And, I think we wouldn't want somebody who used to be a murderer on there. I think we wouldn't want somebody who, had a child molestation conviction 30 years ago and saying, oh, well, they're better now. And I don't know why we as a culture think sexual assault against women is not in that category when it would be against children. I guarantee you that if he had sexually assaulted a man, if this was an assault against a man that had happened, Republicans would be singing a very different tune right now. And we shouldn't have this category of assault against women that is easy to disregard.
Yeah, I mean, especially because when it was anonymous and it came out, I said, I'm leery of anything anonymous. I'm leery of any of that. But as soon as this woman came to light and she said, "This is what happened to me," I immediately believed her because there's nothing in this for her. There's no upside to this. There's only degrees of horrible and worse. So I mean, the fact that she put herself out there to say, "Look, this is my story, and this is why I don't want this guy on the court, and neither should you," I think to me is wholly believable.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I do think it's important that we say that there are a lot of really good reasons why people don't want to put their name on stories of sexual assault. This Dr. Ford's phone number and personal address were posted online on Twitter. She has become a target of a really virulent right wing, and that's terrifying. But even if you took that out of the context of this national debate, women don't do this for any number of reasons. That this happens in their communities, in their families, and I should say men who have been sexually assaulted, and several men I have seen come forward on Twitter in the last couple of days have had this exact experience and said that I was assaulted and I did not feel safe coming forward. Again, this is something that happens to women, and certainly it overwhelmingly does, but it does happen to men, and it's not an issue that exists in a vacuum. And it should just be easy to say, we should hear this woman, and we should hear her even if she doesn't put her name on it. But when she does then come forward and put her name out and say, "This is me, I'm going to take all of these horrible things because I believe this is something that the country needs to hear," this is an act of patriotism. This is an act of a woman who says, "My country is in danger, and I am going to sacrifice my privacy, my deeply personal story, for the love of my country to try and stop something terrible from happening." And we owe her a debt of gratitude. Coming forward is such a hard thing to do in a vacuum. Coming forward on the national stage is a mind-boggling act of courage.
No, I'm right there with you. But here's the thing that I've never understood, and maybe it's because I've fortunately never been assaulted. I don't understand the silence. I don't understand. I'm somebody who would want. I would want to exact revenge. I would want. Sure. I would want retribution. I would want someone punished. I would. Yeah. I think but again, it's never happened to me, so I can't put myself actually in those shoes. But it's just the way I think about it. I think a lot of people feel the same way who haven't been assaulted. And I guess that's a psychological question on why it is people internalize this stuff. But I know I struggle with, why'd you let it go for so long?
Sure. Well, I will say this, and I think that this is something that we as men need to be much better about, right? And because when we as men go out and we tell a story to a room, by and large, we're believed, right? That we can go into our office and we can set the stage or we can say this is how something is going to go. We can go into our home life and we tend to set the direction for how our culture is going, how our life is going. We have presumed that we will be believed all along. And I think that when you look at the experiences of women, that's a very, very different experience, right? And I think that as men, we need to be able to look at that differently and to say, not that this is a question of are we losing our societal power, but are we bringing everybody to the same platform that we've had all along? I think that the repercussions for women coming forward have traditionally been so much greater than what we experience that it's hard for us as men to say, "Oh, I understand this fully," because we don't right. Empathize that we don't live the same consequences. But I think when you look at what's really out there and we listen to what women have said about their experiences when they have come forward, we have to say, man, they have it differently than we do, and that's not okay. And that's the next part, is that we hear, that's not the experience I have, and what we're doing right now is saying, so I don't believe it. And what we need to hear is that's not the experience I have. Boy, that's a terrible experience. How do we fix it? And that's where we can be productive in this conversation. And I think that's what we really risk losing at a foundational level in our country. When we have somebody who's accused of sexually assaulting 20 women, nominating somebody to the court who is accused of sexually assaulting a woman, who has had people who have been domestic abusers on his staff, we are putting this at an institutional level, and it makes it really easy for us as men to ignore it, right? Because we say, oh, look, we're the ones in power, we're the ones that set this up. Our government is ignoring it. And if our government ignores it, it makes it really easy for us to ignore it. And we need to be part of standing up against that, saying, hey, this isn't okay.
Yeah, because I think most men want to be on the right side of this.
Yeah.
I mean, if I've got two daughters, and I never want to see them have to deal with this kind of a scenario. But again, I look at someone like Kavanaugh, who entitled. I look at someone like Trump, very very much wealthy, white privilege, power that I think most people don't understand. And it's one of these moments where you go, is this what the entitled do? Is this something we've just grown accustomed to?
Yeah, and I think it's both, right? Like, there's certainly, you see a lot of studies about sexual assault, and that it's frequently not about sex, it is about power. And when we as men have been the people wielding the power in society, and we have been forever, basically, and we're starting, hopefully, to see some changes in that creates turbulence, right? And I agree with you. Men want to be on the right side of this. No man I talk to, with very few exceptions, says, too bad, we're the men, we're in charge. But there's a difference for us between saying we want to be on the right side of it, and for us really sitting down and looking at ourselves and saying, are we on the right side of it? When we react to something, when we hear men do this, is our first reaction to say, no, we don't, and fight against it? Or do we sit down and hear what that person is trying to say and analyze it at that point, analyze it on its merits, or do we react? And it's really easy when we've held the power to react and continue to move the same way, because there are very little consequences for us.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, go ahead.
No, I mean, the question I was going to ask you is, so given that frame, because again, I think we've seen all of those things playing out again. We're watching the same movie from 1991. How do you think Monday's going to go? Do you expect the Republicans to jump into line in a full throat attack of her? Maybe you were fantasizing, the Arlen Specter thing, or this Alan Simpson. Why would you have anything to do with these people? And are you expecting a repeat, or do you think the Republicans will be a little more tactful?
So I think, first of all, there's probably only a 75% chance we get to Monday. I think there's a substantially less than 0% chance that Kavanaugh withdraws before then, or is asked to withdraw, because this is a losing issue for Republicans if they get to a hearing when their entire representation on the committee is met, right? And so you're going to have a bunch of men asking a woman who has come forth with a story of sexual assault with the agenda of trying to undermine that story. And do I think they're going to be blatant in the way that they maybe were in 1991 with Anita Hill? No, I really don't. I think that they're going to try to sound understanding while still trying to undermine her story. And that's actually maybe even more dangerous. It's insidious, and it's going to further that narrative. But we're already hearing stories that the narrative is going to be to undermine this person's story, to try and bring forth women who have known Kavanaugh to tell their stories about him. Again, going back to the idea that, Trump has known a lot more than 20 women, and it doesn't negate the 20 women that he's been accused of assaulting, right? But it seems like that's going to be the tactic they take. So no, I don't think they're going to. I really hope that we've learned at least enough lessons for them to not be on the bench and saying, well, were you asking for it? Were you drunk too? What were you wearing? I hope that we're past that, at least at a senatorial level. But the questions are going to be there in the subtext regardless. And
does it matter, though? I mean, if she was drunk, does it matter if she had been drinking? Does that matter?
No, she could have been the drunkest person on the planet wearing absolutely nothing, saying, Brett, come here. And the second she says no or tries to stop it, no, it doesn't matter at all. But they're going to try and make it matter.
And it doesn't matter to me, because Kavanaugh has taken the position it didn't happen. I know nothing about it. And I think this is kind of an interesting position, because if there's just one person who says, no, I saw them both there, that just shoots his already weak credibility completely out of the water.
Yeah, and we know he's already lied on under oath. We know this. We've seen the evidence of this from his emails surrounding the torture memos back in the Bush administration. We know that he was involved in that. We know that he wrote an op-ed around this. We know that he's testified saying he didn't. So we already know he's lied under oath. And the fact that we're sort of approaching this conversation with the idea that this Dr. Ford is lying about her story when we haven't heard anything from her that's been a lie, and she's actually been able to produce evidence documenting her story, as opposed to Kavanaugh, who's already lied under oath, is the person to be believed, is kind of ridiculous to me. Like we have a history on both of them, and only one of them has a history of proven truth up to this point.
Yeah, and then there's the third party involved in this, this Mike Judge, who has written books about being wasted the entire time through high school. And look, I went through that as well. I mean, there was a lot of drinking when I was in school. Yeah. Maybe we did the same things. Mm-hmm. The hope is that he comes forward and is honest. But I got to tell you, I don't find him credible either, given what I've seen of his writings.
Yeah, no, I don't at all. First of all, the fact that he does talk a lot about in his writings about drinking at a high school. During high school, he talks about his friendship with Kavanaugh a little bit in those books from what I've read. We put the two of them together, and we put the two of them together in this sort of pre-frat drinking culture, right? This high school elitist drinking party culture. So we know that that's there, that exists. That was a dynamic that existed at the time. And we put that then in the context of what's sort of happening now. We have the foundation of where these things happen, right? Where you have young men seeing the world in front of them, having probably never been told no about anything in their life of significance, drinking, feeling like the world's out there for them and they're going to take it. And we've seen this situation over and over again. And certainly that doesn't mean that it happened in this situation, but hearing the story, putting it in the context of what we know about this administration, what we know about the millions of stories that we've heard in this Me Too movement that have had that same ring of truth, and knowing what we know about the accusers, that we have to start from this is credible. And we're not starting from there, and that scares me a little bit.
Right. Well, you keep hearing it. Well, I had a bunch of conservatives, email me and say, well, what happened to innocent until proven guilty? And I'm going, what about that from her point of view as well?
Right. And you know what? If we were putting Judge Kavanaugh on trial, if he was being charged with this, that's one thing. Then guess what? He would get a jury, and there would be a burden of proof on the prosecution to do that. That's not what we're doing here. What we're doing is we're actually talking about, do we want to give him the power to judge cases? Right. By the way, the Supreme Court, there are no jury trials. He would be the jury, bringing this history to the highest court in the land and getting away with it, right? How will he ever have credibility as part of our highest national jury after this? And I just don't see it. I don't see him being a fair arbiter of any cases that come up. And it's not out of the realm of possibility. We're going to see a case very similar like this come up against our president, whether he's sitting in office at the time or not. And the man that appointed him to the court has to start, right? And so that's a really, really important question that we have to look at. And I hope that our Senate will do that.
Yeah, I'm with you. Do you find it ironic that the guy who cut his teeth and made his bones going after Bill Clinton is now the subject of a situation, not similar, but of sexual allegations?
I almost find it sadly predictable, right? Like we almost could have said, of course, the people in the Ken Starr investigation had these stories, because the fact is we have these stories everywhere, that it's not partisan, that it's not about class, it's not about race, it's not about political party or political leanings, it is about power. And we see this happen, and there was a lot of that power dynamic happening between the Clinton White House and the Starr investigation for sure. And we've seen these bad actions happen at the congressional level, at the Starr committee level since then. Newt Gingrich wasn't exactly a choir boy. And,
no.
a whole bunch of the other members of Congress who revolted around that were the same. And this has been 25 years of more of the same. So ironic, yeah, in its own way, but sadly predictable.
Yeah, last question I've got for you. Do you think Kavanaugh gets through? Do you think he gets a seat on the bench, or do you think this derails him?
So he's got a really hard path now. I think that it's probably more likely he does not get confirmed right now. And I even think that as time goes on, unless something comes out that changes Dr. Ford's story or disproves it, I think that it gets harder for him day by day. I'd say right now 60-40 he doesn't get on. And there's even, like I said, I think probably a 25% chance he withdraws from consideration before we get to the hearing next week.
Wow, there's a prediction I'm looking forward to. Ben,
Yeah.
I appreciate the thoughts. Good on you, and I look forward to talking to you again as this continues.
Anytime, Rick. Thanks so much.
Good stuff. Our good friend Ben Jackson. You can follow him at Dad of the Decade on Twitter, one of the more popular commentators there. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
This is why we fight, why we lie awake. This is why.
Minimize and distract, and really disgrace. I mean, it's really just disgraceful what we've seen. And Susan Collins, again, to me, right out on the front of the "Are you kidding me?" thing. The idea that, I don't know where she's dreaming this up. Before the hearing, let's just have a Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Session.
Check out our website,
ricksmithshow.com. So I got to tell you, the more I look at the Republican responses to Professor Ford coming forward,
look, there's part of me that goes,
the more it looks like 1991 all over again. Anita Hill all over again, and
this is another
failures. Of lots of politicians. I'm still remember Arlen Specter.
This is another example.
Can't get him.
Of a
Alan Simpson, same thing. There were a bunch of them.
This is an example.
Even Joe Biden, to be honest,
my view,
I thought dropped
disagree
the ball.
with me if you think I'm wrong.
And my hope is come Monday. We don't see the same kind of. Are you sure you're not? Are you sure you're not delusional? Are you sure not fantasizing? Are you sure this just isn't your Women Month thing?
There is going to be an Arlen Specter.
I'm waiting for it.
Going to be there.
Anyway, here to share some thoughts on why this issue should be important to men.
And I look at this
since we seem to be the targets. I've asked Ben Jackson to come talk with us, or Dad of the Year, or Dad of the Decade, if you want to follow him on Twitter. Ben, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, always glad to talk to you.
So why is this an important issue?
Well, listen, I think the first thing that's important to say is that things that matter to women matter to men.
Enhance their own fame and fortune. While glaciers melt, oceans rise, extreme weather expands, species perish, and Earth itself spins toward being unlivable.
The ability to work and earn an equal wage.
To acknowledge
Those are things
shame,
that matter
they
to us
need help.
as a
Luckily,
culture, as
a
a
feisty
society,
group called
as
Cowboys
we are
for
as
Liberty
Americans. So
has stepped forward to acknowledge it for
these are
them
not
by
just things that matter to
establishing
women.
a
They're
climate
foundational to
deniers
who we
hall
are
of shame.
as Americans, right?
Among the first
And
class of
I think that
infamous
you
deniers
mentioned
are
in your
Charles
intro,
and David Koch, who've
what we
dumped
saw
more than
with
$100
Anita
million
Hill
into
in
front groups
1991.
opposing efforts to
And
halt climate change.
really
Senator
both
Jill
sides of the
Inhofe,
political
the
aisle
dotty
were
old
terrible
dean of
to her.
deniers, who has called global warming
the
a
hope
conspiracy
is
spawned
that
by the
in
Weather
the,
Channel.
20,
And the former
almost 7
CEO of
years,
ExxonMobil, who secretly funded hooked-up academic reports to discredit the science of climate change. This is Jim Hightower saying, the Hall of Shame is fun, but it's not a prank. It points out that climate change is not only caused by human action, but also by human inaction. And putting names and faces to the small group of humans selfishly preventing progress can help the majority of us see that we can and must rise up to stop them. To help, go to whydeny.org. Whydeny.org.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
In the buses way, sir. Come on! The unit forever defending rights. Let's fight the right wing, our workers unite. With our brothers and our sisters from many far off lands. There is power in our
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. So lots going on in North Carolina, South Carolina, in the aftermath of Florence. Last reports I saw in the aftermath, 32 people have lost their lives. And, while that's bad, I feared it was going to be much worse. And yet we're not out of the woods yet. The hard work is yet to come, cleaning up the mess and restoring people's lives. And, when these things happen, I reach out to my good friend Roy Gillespie, a fellow Teamster, the master of disaster. Wherever there's disaster, the Teamsters send him to coordinate their assistance and their help for folks. He is right now in Durham, North Carolina. Roy, thanks for taking time for us.
Great, Rick, man. I appreciate you and I appreciate the show, and I really appreciate all the unionized people in this country.
And because it's times of tragedy where you really see them step forward, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I was tasked to go work with the Red Cross and all the unions. I'm the National Labor Liaison for all unions to the American Red Cross, FEMA, and other volunteer agencies like Catholic Charities and some of the others. I arrived here in yesterday in Durham, but I had been actually working on the job here since last Thursday, having the unions work with the different entities and helping out the American Red Cross, which in turn helps out our members and especially the American people.
Yeah, making sure that the supplies are stocked, shelters are there, food banks, all of that stuff, all of the things people are going to need to weather the storm, I guess, right?
Yeah, we had just a point. Thursday, I got Saturday, I got a call from the American Red Cross. It was raining hard. The FEMA food and cots were at Camp Lejeune. Two of the trucks coming out of Camp Lejeune in a convoy turned over because the roads gave away. So they called me that morning, and I called the president of Joint Council here in Carolinas and also the principal officer of Local 71. I said, I need some help. He said, okay, what kind of help do you need? I said, I need a couple of drivers. Well, he called the USF Holland, got 2 drivers to volunteer. They took tractors. They went up and they picked up at another location further north in North Carolina, picked up trailers of food and cots and got them back because the shelters had 13,000 people in it and they had run out of food. And the feelings here is the worst is yet to come. The rivers haven't crested yet. They're still rising. And once the water goes down and some of these houses are completely covered in water, there's going to be more deaths coming up. I heard today 33, but I heard that there's possibly 40-something. They just haven't gotten it together. And people that sheltered in their homes when the water came up and flooded, there could be some that are in there dead. We found that out with Katrina and Matthews.
It's just horrible, and that's the thing. I mean, you look at the aftermath and all of the cleanup and all of the work that comes after these storms. That's when the real hard work begins. I mean, making it through is one thing, but then going back and restoring people's lives and cleaning up the mess afterwards, that's the part that I think a lot of us forget about.
Yeah, and our members are hurting here just like everybody else. Members at Teamsters can go to, if they want to donate money, go to Teamsters.org and donate to the disaster fund. 100% of your money is going to go to your brothers and sisters that are hurting here in the Carolinas. General President Hoffa is pulling out all the stops and bringing in, I can't say manpower, is politically incorrect, people power, the heavy lifting and the heavy movement of the Teamsters. I've also been working with General Russell Honore, who was the rock star down in Katrina, and he's been providing me with high-profile vehicles, and I even have a helicopter, which is actually, it's a Sikorsky, it's a Teamster-made helicopter that I'm going to take a ride on this afternoon to survey the damage with the head of the American Red Cross here in North Carolina. So the unions are working, plumbers and pipe fitters brought in a couple of shower trailers and restrooms for people down here. But our union people down here, even though the density is not as big in the mid that we have in the Midwest and in California, but the union members here are stepping up left and right, because they're helping neighbor, or union member helping neighbor.
And it's a story you're not going to hear very many places of the Teamsters and other unions stepping forward and helping out in communities, and especially, as you pointed out, in communities where there isn't a high density like you see in North Carolina and in South Carolina and some of these states. But it's the right thing to do, as everyone has always told me. When crisis hits, it's the union members that go rushing in.
Well, they're professionals. Everybody's a professional in their craft. Be it the carpenters, the electricians, the plumbers, the teamsters, the truck drivers, the nurses, they're all professionals. And I want to give a shout out to Liz Schuler from AFL-CIO. She's a rock star. I've been working with her for about a week now, and it's been great. Anything I've asked, she's done. The resources, the people, it's just been absolutely great.
And it's something that people need to be recognized for, and not congratulated, but recognized for their effort. Because look, they could not, and this is where I've always said the unions have always been part of the community and a strong thing that binds people together. And I wish they got more credit for it. But let me ask you this: while you're on the ground, what are you seeing? How I know you were in Puerto Rico after Maria. I know you've been in tons of these things. Your initial assessment, what are you looking at right now?
There's a lot of problems here. There's water still rising. There's roads that are washed out. Even the drivers that are working for the union companies, non-union companies, have to be very careful on where they're driving their vehicles, due to the fact that they might go down a road one time and then come back and the road is washed away, or because of the weight of the vehicle, it could turn over. There seems to be a lot of copperhead snakes out here running loose, as we were told today. I haven't seen one, so you haven't heard me yelling and screaming and running the opposite direction. But there is environmental problems. There's a bunch of Superfund sites here that got inundated with water, so there could be another problem just like they had in Texas. I don't know if you know it or not, but there's still people dying from Harvey from last year that got bugs or some type of virus from the Superfund sites, and they have died because of that. And if you remember the big picture of the 4 firemen putting up the American flag during 9/11, well, that famous picture, all of those firemen are dead now of cancer.
No, and these are horrible tragedies. I mean, Katrina was the same thing. I had met a number of people there when we had gone down to tour the sites and to try and help out. And, some of those folks are gone because, that was just a giant soup bowl of toxic who knows what. Yeah.
And that's something that's not reported by the news, that these toxic sites are here, just like in Texas and Katrina, and actually in Puerto Rico. These toxic sites are still out here, and once that groundwater gets into it and it gets out in the system, it's all over the place. In the Teamsters, we just took a course, it was 14 of us, OSHA course on how to handle disasters before, during, and after. And that's out to the public, and our brother Teamsters and stuff are doing training on that, teaching people some of the pitfalls, some of the things that you would never think about doing. We've got a list and stuff out of things you do before, during, and after a hurricane or a disaster, and things that a lot of people never thought of.
Right.
Before, make sure that you have your insurance policy. Make sure that if you're out of work, send a letter to your creditors and let them know, hey, I'm out of work. I'm not trying to stiff you, that I'm in a financial bind. A lot of them will waive fees or say, okay, look, you got 3 months. You can go start your cycle of paying your bills again. Do you know where safe places are? Do you know that if something major happens and knocks out the power and you lose all your cell phone power and stuff, where do you meet people? Where's a gathering place that the family can come together and let it know that everybody is safe. And it's very, very important that you learn some of these things in the Teamsters. And we did a pamphlet, and I'll send it to you, about what to do during disasters and how to handle disasters, things that you would never think about doing or having. You know, if your house is flooded, immediately call your cable company, your electric company, and gas company, and have it turned off.
Right.
Like, that way you're not being billed, because sometimes a meter is damaged, and you could end up with a $30,000 bill for electricity, and you've been out of the house for 3 or 4 weeks. And then insurance companies. And Sandy, I got insurance companies mad at me because in Sandy they had people that were destroyed, and people, insurance companies came out and says, "Oh, you look like you got $15,000 damage. You know, I tell you what, because of the stress you're going through, we're going to give you $20,000." And people took it and says, "Oh gosh, such and such insurance company was so great to me and stuff." And then they find out that after everything is over with, they're not grandfathered into that house that's 50 or 60 years old. You have to tear everything out. You have to do different wiring, different codes. So you'll turn around and that bill to bring your house back to just the standard it was before the disaster is $100,000. And then you go to your insurance company and say, "Hey, it's $100,000. I'm sorry, you signed off on this $20,000. Have a good day."
Yeah, I've heard those horror stories.
So we're working with a collaboration of Teamsters, AFL-CIO, and all unions here. You don't have to be affiliated, but we're working with all unions here, and we're getting the word out that we're working. It was kind of funny. I showed up at Red Cross headquarters today, and I was pulled in so many different directions. So we're glad you're here. Labor's here. Glad what you've been doing. The mission is intense here. We need your help. We want you here. And years ago, or not too long ago, they didn't welcome us. Well, they welcomed us when the disaster.
Right.
But when we tried to organize different parts of it, they didn't want to have any parts of it. But it's just like this. You don't love me until you need me.
Yeah. So let me ask you, in the run up to this, because you've seen, far too many of these disasters. Would you gauge the preparedness? Where would you put the preparedness of the region that you're in now? Going forward, because my fear is that there was very little preparedness, and the aftermath is going to be horrible. Because look, I have very little faith in this administration to do anything proactively. So I'm curious what you've seen and what you experienced. Because look, I look at what happened in Puerto Rico, and I'll be honest, I'm a little leery.
Well, I think the administration got their butt kicked in this, and two, you've got career people in FEMA and in Homeland Security that will come out and help even more, because they don't want the stain on them of Puerto Rico.
Right.
Puerto Rico was a different animal altogether. It was a very hard one for me to work, but the Teamsters at Local 901 in Puerto Rico were excellent in working and helping their members in the community. When a disaster like this happens, our general president of the Teamsters puts available all the big Teamster trucks, which are familiar, to move stuff into the area. You can't do that in Puerto Rico. We had to fly stuff in, which is very expensive, even though some of the airlines that are under contract with George Miranda move stuff by air into Puerto Rico and water and stuff. So it was a challenge itself. Two, it's very hard to get into Puerto Rico in and out with all the red tape and everything else. But the people there are resilient, and we worked real well with the Puerto Rican people to help. I don't get happy with a lot of administration, because I know that it's all basically a photo op.
Right.
And they have no clue of what really goes on the ground. In Joplin, I complained about President Obama coming down there, because just like Trump, President Trump, I don't want to see him down here for the simple reason it's a photo op. And they take away resources. When a president comes into an area, You got all the news media. You have to protect them with all the medical, first responders, police, National Guard, state police. That pulls away from resources that can actually help people. So no matter what party affiliation or left wing, right wing, center, I don't want to see politicians. I'd rather see you on TV talking about getting help and people helping each other, because it becomes a sideshow and people are standing up there smiling where the same people could be out there helping save a life.
No, I'm with you on that. But my concern is that we find out that there's no number 2 person at FEMA. We find out that the number 1 person's in trouble. We find out that there's all this chaos in leadership, and my concern was because of that, maybe it doesn't filter down to helping folks on the ground, and I hope I'm wrong.
Well, yeah, there is turmoil, but there are a lot of people like us. They're the little people. They're the working people that are under them that make these decisions. Most people are the heads of these different government agencies are just heads, and they're giving talking points and telling you what you're supposed to talk about and what you know. But it's the real people that have been there for a while, the staffers, that make things work. And I'm sure in North Carolina and South Carolina, this area here, being Republican stronghold, I'm sure that not only the president but Lindsey Graham will make sure that it's done, because he wants to get reelected. And if this turns out to be a disaster, he could not get reelected.
Well, let's hope that everything moves smoothly forward. We don't lose any more lives, and that the water recedes, and we get somewhere back to normal before the next horrible tragedy comes. That I'm sure you'll maybe come back and tell us what's going on as things progress. Roy, I give you nothing but the utmost credit. You're one of the heroes in my view. I appreciate you taking a little time for us.
Thanks, Rick, and I'll talk to you later.
Good stuff. Our good friend Roy Gillespie, the master of disaster for the Teamsters. And again, if you want to donate some money to help out with our Teamster brothers and sisters and folks in North Carolina and affected by this, Teamsters.org is a good place to start. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
To starve, we're the first ones to die, the first ones in line for that pie in the sky.
Place to start. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Ones to starve, we're the first ones to die, the first ones in line for that pie in the sky, and we're always the last when the crane is set out for the worker.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1951. That was the day pineapple workers on the island of Lanai emerged victorious. ILWU Local 142 workers were back on the job after 7 months on strike against the Hawaiian Pineapple Company. It was the first contract signed by the new big union that had recently organized 35,000 sugar and pineapple workers. Local newspapers rejoiced that the long silent whistle signaling workers back to the world's largest pineapple plantation was finally blowing. The workers on other islands ended their strike in May for an 8-cent an hour wage increase. Lanai workers held out for additional demands. They wanted an end to the anti-Filipino discrimination they faced in wages and housing and the poor treatment they endured from their bosses. Historian Dionisio Naden Valdez notes that, quote, the ultimate concern was equal treatment and dignity for Filipinos. For decades, a colonized workforce lacking citizenship rights. It was a further step towards building interracial unionism. The press, of course, vilified the strikers, red-baiting their union leaders and extolling the virtues of the company for bringing progress to the island. But the union won big. They reestablished pattern bargaining lost in an earlier strike. They also secured additional wage increases, dues collection, seniority rights, inexpensive housing, and medical coverage. Importantly, there were contract provisions that addressed mechanization and de-skilling of work. The union was finally in a position to change unfair job classifications, winning higher pay for the jobs that required operation of new machinery. What the union could not control in the long run was what Valdez referred to as the runaway plantation. By the 1970s, employment had plummeted as companies fled union fields for cheaper land and labor in Thailand and the Philippines.
Minimum wage. Minimum wage. Yeah!
You know what it means when they pay you minimum wage? You know what they're trying to tell you is like, hey, if I could pay you less, I would.
Oh, yeah, if that isn't the truth. And I look at what's going on in Michigan. Evidently, the legislature there in Michigan passed a number of pieces of legislation. One, increasing the minimum wage, and two, providing paid sick time for workers. Now, labor advocates are looking at this going, well, this isn't such a great thing. Because look, you may say, hey, it's a good thing. They raised the minimum wage a little bit, a little tick up, some paid sick time. What advocates are saying is, had they been able to put it on the ballot, as they were working to do, and as I understand they had the signatures to do, had they put it on the ballot and the voters went to the polls and voted on it, it would be much more difficult to overturn. Because there is some view that, down the road, what ends up happening is, well, hey, businesses are complaining about that paid sick time. Maybe we begin to scale that back. And what the fear is, and rightly so, is that the legislature, well, they do that with simple majorities instead of, and I think it's like a 3/4 majority to overturn a ballot initiative. To where if the voters have spoken, you need a super majority to overturn the will of the voters. So the Republicans usurped that by ramming through a small increase in the minimum wage and a couple of paid sick days. And it got me thinking about, how masterful, the Republicans really are at playing this game of really getting people to think that, workers make too much. And I just had one of these, bizarre back and forths with a listener who, he volunteers with the Chamber of Commerce, so that, that makes him a big entrepreneur and he knows everything about economics. His line to me repeatedly was, unions are bad because they raise the cost of labor. And that's the boss's view. It's bad because I shouldn't have to pay you any more than desperation would allow me to. If you're desperate enough and hungry enough and your children are go without enough that you're pliable and desperate, so be it. That's a good thing. It's good for business to have cheap, exploitable labor. And their argument is the reason that companies, flee overseas is because there's cheaper and more exploitable labor. And my fear is always with this argument is I don't know that they actually think through what it looks like if they get their wish. Now, look, I'm going to fight every single day and at every opportunity to ensure that they don't get their wish, that this doesn't become a low road, low wage, deregulated economy where you have a handful of oligarchs and then poverty wages for everyone else. And, as was pointed out, in the last 40 years, productivity in this country has skyrocketed. And it used to be, there's a great graph out there that shows, from the end of World War II up until the middle 70s, as productivity gains went up, wages followed. They were right along the same 40 to 5 degree angle. So if productivity went up 20%, wages followed in suit. And that's how you built this very prosperous working class, what I argue is the most prosperous working class in the history of civilization, and the meritocracy that I think a lot of us believe should be in place, that the harder you work, the better you should do. I mean, it's a very American kind of thought process. And yet, since the middle 70s, what has happened? There's been a massive decoupling of productivity gains and wage growth. And what's happened is over the last 44 years, productivity has skyrocketed 77%, while the wages of high school educated working people have basically been deadline stagnant, and in a lot of cases actually falling over 40 years. And, I was just having this conversation, and I've said this before on the program. When I first started working in the freight business, we was making $15 an hour. If you had enough hours, you got a pension credit, you got a healthcare credit, and if you didn't have enough hours, you could buy the healthcare credits to get the healthcare. Top rate was 18 and some change, 1870s, somewhere in that range. This was back in the late 80s. This isn't economic gimmickry. This is none of this stuff. Today, the exact same job, $14 an hour, $18.50 top rate, worse health care, no pension. And you go, what happened to all of that income? What happened to all of that compensation that, a worker 30 years ago doing this job was able to support a family and really move forward and build wealth, build true wealth, that if you were willing to work hard in this job, because look, it was hard work. I spent 30 years doing this stuff. My body is, bad hips, bad knees, bad back, you name it. I've had it. But you worked really hard and you did well. That's gone. And I blame it specifically on people who say, well, we need cheaper labor and those unions are bad for cheap labor. Of course they're bad for cheap labor. Workers don't want to be exploited. And this is one of those moments where, the hope is that we as working people in this country, and look, you can have the view that, labor is bad, unions are bad because it takes from me. I'm the boss, and it takes from my 7th beach house, and it takes from my grandkids' retirement, and good on the list of things that you could, with a enormous amount of resource, could then invest in, because it's certainly not in new jobs. We've seen that. It comes back to this war between capital and labor, and what side are you on? The old labor frame. Which side of this divide are you on? Now, obviously, this person I was having a back and forth with wants to be in the investor class, views himself as superior to the people who, serve his food or, plow the streets or, build houses or drive trucks or whatever. Those are just stupid working people. As he told me, get a degree and you'll learn something and you can be an entrepreneur. And I've got 2 degrees. And I love what I do. And I have great pride in what I do. And the problem is that people like this spend an awful lot of their time trying to demean working people. And I'm of the mindset, I don't care what you do for a living. It has respect. It has dignity and should be such. So when I see these kind of frames, it's infuriating to me. When I see the fact that you have all of this assault, and get ready, there are more assaults coming. The labor movement in this country is under massive attack from every direction. And while I've had my problems over the years with certain people and certain things, I have never wavered once from the idea that workers deserve and should have a voice on the job and share in the profits that their labor creates. Never once. And at some point, the hope is that if you speak common sense enough, that other working people raise their head and go, yeah, that's right. I haven't seen a real raise in, a decade. The frame of, I'm just happy to have a job, is now kind of changing. We're now at a time where people are going to start going, well, you know what? I'm going to start demanding better wages. And guess what? Our policymakers have set it up that we've squandered whatever resource we had by giving away massive tax breaks. So when the next recession comes, and there's some saying 2019 is the next recession, it's going to be another decade of lost wages because workers have lost that opportunity to claw some of those gains back. And it's amazing to me. And I have these conversations often with the so-called investor class. I should be able to make as much as I want, and you should. And as a country, we should be taxing it and using it and putting it to better use. And roads, bridges, school, healthcare, go down the list. Creating that infrastructure so that entrepreneurs can have the ability to then go out and make their millions. I have no problem with wealthy people. I actually know a couple and I like them a lot. The reality is the mass accumulation of wealth. I look at the Koch brothers. I look at Sheldon Adelson. I look at Jeff Bezos. You go down the list. Gates, Buffett, the rest of them. The outweighed power that they have in our country to move policy and to move institution should scare every working person in this country. And you look at the labor laws that aren't being enforced, and you look at the decisions coming out of the NLRB, you have to be very afraid because they have their hands firmly gripped around the necks of working people. I'm curious what you think. You can share your thoughts, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Do you think Michigan did the right thing? Do you think the legislators had it in their hearts? Gee, we really care about those workers. We're going to give them a pittance of a raise and maybe some sick days that we'll take back later on. Or should it have gone to the voters? Should the people have had their say? I'm always on the camp of the people should have their say. But you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Tell me what you think. Quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We're not unarmed. A weapon solidarity. Jim Beals and Karen Silkwood. The list goes on. Oh, it's a war on the worker. War on the worker. Oh, it's a war on the worker. War on the worker. Oh, it's a war on the workers. And it's time we started calling the shots.
Your proud defender of the working class majority, Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1895. That was the day that Booker T. Washington delivered what came to be known as the Atlanta Compromise speech, which outlined his vision for race relations and black labor in the South. Washington was the founder of the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute, a college designed to train black students for careers in teaching, farming, and other trades. Washington was invited to give an address to the Cotton States and International Exposition in Atlanta. It was the first time that a black man was asked to speak before a black and white Southern audience. In his speech, he urged Southern landowners and business leaders to employ black labor over European immigrants. He said, quote, "To those of the white race who look to the incoming of those of foreign birth and strange tongue and habits for the prosperity of the South, were I permitted, I would repeat what I say to my own race. Cast down your bucket where you are." He continued, "Cast it down among those people who have, without strikes and labor wars, tilled your fields, cleared your forests, built your railroads and cities, and brought forth treasures from the bowels of the earth, and helped make possible this magnificent representation of the progress of the South." His speech outlined a plan for gradual black economic advancement. He declared, quote, "Agitation of questions of social equality is the extremist folly." Other black leaders, most notably W.E. Du Bois, rejected Booker T. Washington's idea of gradual advancement. Instead, Du Bois fought racial discrimination through the legal system and helped to found the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So Washington, D.C., all abuzz over Kavanaugh. And good luck. Will Kavanaugh be the new Borg? It will be interesting to see if Monday happens and, well, what comes out of Monday. And here to share some thoughts on that and other things going on around the world and in Washington, D.C., I've got Luke Vargas, Talk Media News. Luke, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you.
So the Kavanaugh thing, are we expecting Monday to come off?
I don't know. I mean, this is one of these stories where it reveals my complete inability to wrap my mind around political calculus, that lawmakers in Washington feel. I mean, this seems like an easy decision that someone who is even accused or could be realistically accused of committing a crime like this, endangering the life of a woman whose fears, I think, do go a long way towards representing the fears of a large share of the American population, is in no way qualified to decide the largest judicial matters in the land. Now, I do think some sort of hearing and or investigation is needed here, and if truly Mr. Kavanaugh's accuser, Dr. Christine Ford, is found to have a story that makes no sense and that she's completely made this up, then perhaps we should go back to studying more carefully whatever merits might exist for Judge Kavanaugh. But without that, and I don't think we're going to get anything close to a proper investigation, I just don't think it's proper to put someone like this on the highest court. And I say that while keeping in mind that that does not mean Republicans need to surrender this appointment. And I know, folks on the left perhaps see in these allegations against Mr. Kavanaugh a possibility of delaying this whole appointment process past the midterms, into the lame duck, perhaps even into a new congressional landscape in which Democrats hold more levers of power and a conservative judge will not be appointed. Perhaps that will occur. But I think at the very least, it just boggles my mind that, quote unquote, family values Republicans wouldn't or don't feel comfortable going to their constituents and saying, look, I'm determined to put someone with conservative values on the Supreme Court. But what we've learned about Judge Kavanaugh makes me seriously doubt whether he's the best person for that message. Yep. I encourage President Trump to just go. He has a list of 25 judges. Just find the next person on the list and pick a woman off that list. There are a few women on there, and just say this is who we'd rather have as the standard bearer. But feeling so locked into this, I just can't understand how that political calculus is reached, but that does seem to be where Senate Republicans at least are at this point.
Yeah, but, well, there's only one guy on the list who I think would give Trump a pass. So there's part of that plays into this in my view as well.
Sure. But again, why do Senate Republicans feel that needs to be their top priority? It may be that it's Trump's. Perhaps I don't even doubt that. But does that need to be? Does Trump's, self-preservation instincts need to guide the, agenda setting and message setting themes in the Supreme Court for a generation? I don't know why those two things are being conflated. But again, I concede I don't understand the impulses that drive many of these legislators. Let me just be clear. So what we're going to see on Monday, according to Chuck Grassley, who's sort of setting the framework for this quote unquote hearing, is that Kavanaugh will testify and Dr. Ford will testify. They have rejected thus far, the Senate Judiciary Republicans, appeals to have this man named Mark Judge, who is apparently a third-party witness to this alleged sexual assault, testify. Chairman Grassley is saying, look, he doesn't see why that's needed. Let me just first say two people doing a he said, she said is not an investigation. That is a he said, she said, which is far, far short of an investigation. Right. And nor is the therapist for Dr. Ford going to be permitted to testify, someone who apparently corroborates her claims about this alleged incident. So again, compare that to the Anita Hill hearings where 22 witnesses were called up. This is a two-person hearing. And I took particular note of another statement coming from Senate Judiciary Republicans, which was issued just a few hours ago, and in which they basically, in my view, sought to discredit Dr. Ford by saying, look, yesterday night we asked Kavanaugh and his team if they wouldn't hop on an informal phone call with staffers on the Judiciary Committee so he could answer questions and provide clarity about this alleged incident. They basically commended him for doing that, which shouldn't merit
that's not a slap on the back moment. I'm
right, and
I guess colluding with the Republicans on how the messaging is going to go and how the political theater will play out.
Exactly.
I don't know. No gold star there.
And then they condemned Dr. Ford and her legal team for not answering the request to join a phone call with staffers for Republicans on the committee that she's going to testify in front of. I don't see any situation in which a legal team preparing someone for very heated, potentially distorting testimony would agree to sort of preview her remarks so that her opponents can pick over them in advance. But that move to sort of tarnish the witness here, I think, was completely out of line. And finally, I guess I also just take issue with what Republicans on all fronts keep saying, which is that this was like an 11th hour surprise. There is no timing that is supposed to be, that this whole process is supposed to follow. It's supposed to be a thorough vetting of the nominee for the Supreme Court, and to keep suggesting falsely that Democrats sat on this for their own political benefit, as opposed to what appears to be the truth, which is that it was Dr. Ford who had given this information about this incident over to her congressional representatives, but told them not to release it until a time of her choosing. The time, I don't know. I think, yes, there is some politics in here. I think Democrats are being opportunists in a way, but does that mean they are doing this wrong, that they are sullying the process, some sort of sacred process that Republicans are upholding? Not at all. These appointments are highly politicized, and I don't think, but I just sort of in general reject this notion that this is the 11th hour. This was a process that was deliberately rushed, but we are not, Democrats alone do not appear to be the ones responsible for sullying this once much more, sacred responsibility of the Congress.
No, which is why, again, I think someone sitting on the Supreme Court, any of these people with lifetime appointments should have a 60-vote majority, and I was against the Democrats breaking it with federal judges, and I'm dead against it with the Republicans breaking it for Supreme Court nominees, because maybe you get a more moderating force on the court as opposed to someone who is, in my view, like Kavanaugh, is so extreme. But this last moment, this revelation, which the woman didn't want to be, outed. I got to be honest. I don't think she was ever not going to be outed. Once the anonymous letter came out, probably wasn't going to be very hard to find her. So I think she had to eventually come out. But I also don't see any gain in this for her, other than if you like being harassed on the phone, if you like death threats, if you want people picketing outside of your home, if you want hate mail, maybe that's the positive. But I don't see any gain for her in this.
Yeah. I mean, more and more, I just am coming around to these calls to just change the way the Supreme Court operates. It would require a constitutional change. But I think we have a lot of constitutional changes that are long overdue. And I know a growing number of publications. I know The Economist last week writing in favor of a constitutional change to make 18-year term limits, which, if you set it up properly, a little bit like the Senate, would cause 2 judges to be up for appointment every presidential term. And it's not a perfect fix either, but these lifetime appointments and the process which they are now being determined just does not seem to be the right way, to put it mildly. So I'm on board for a major rethinking of how this whole very messy process is handled.
No, I'm with you on that. And there's also part of me, look, I'm a supporter of electoral politics. There's a part of me that says maybe that we should be electing them and for a certain amount of terms, as opposed to these backroom deals.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, these are not like Trump's favorite people. He outsourced this as well. And so you really start thinking about who is responsible for generating the list of these names. I mean, these are think tanks and things like that. It's quite far away from the will of the people.
Yeah, good point. Let's move on. Evidently, there's some new information, some newly released information, memos on why the citizenship question was to be added to the 2020 sentences. What do we know?
Yeah, this is a pretty fascinating story, and I think kind of proof of how much, the Trump White House has just thrown up more scandals than the news media and the news reading public can keep up with. This, to me, is a bombshell, and yet it's, like number 100 on the things that people have been talking about this week. But it caught my eye because the way this whole citizenship question is being added to the 2020 census sort of hinges upon some testimony that Wilbur Ross gave to Congress. He is the Commerce Secretary. He was under oath last year asking questions about why this citizenship question needed to be added. And he repeatedly said in his testimony that it was because the Department of Justice, at their initiative, was basically pounding the table on this and said, we need more data to be collected through the census to be able to enforce the Voting Rights Act, which, if you look at the way that the Department of Justice under Attorney General Jeff Sessions has handled itself, there is very little evidence to suggest they care really at all about enforcing the Voting Rights Act. In fact, they've changed basically their focus from, let's say, protecting the rights of the voting public to, let's say, protecting Christian groups that feel like 2018 America doesn't stick up for their interests. But even so, what these new documents suggest, and this is coming out of a lawsuit filed by the Attorney General of New York, who's suing the federal government over the addition of this question. It involves a memo that has been unredacted, or used to be blacked out by the administration, and now a judge has ordered that it be shown to the public. And it shows memos between Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary, and one of his top aides. And they are in the early stages of this administration, just weeks after coming into the administration. Ross appears to be the one driving this, that he is having conversations, and he says to one of his aides, hey, we've got to be really diligent here in preparing the administrative record for why we do this citizenship question, because it's going to get brought to the courts. It's probably going to go to the Supreme Court. So we need as much evidence as we can to show that the government writ large wants this decision. So they write to the Justice Department, and they get back a letter, an email saying, no, actually the Justice Department does not want to add this question into the census. We think it's not good timing for us because all of this business with James Comey in the news. So they pass. Then Wilbur Ross, seeing the Justice Department doesn't want to play along, goes to the Department of Homeland Security, and they write back and say, no, it's not our job to recommend this. That's the work of the Department of Justice. Eventually, yes, the Department of Justice does send a letter backing the addition of the citizenship question, but the timeline of events really undercuts and is directly contradicted by what Ross told Congress, which is that this was, I'm going to pull up a quote here. He tells Congress that, quote, the Department of Justice initiated the request for inclusion of the citizenship question. In another one, he said he was, quote, responding solely to the Department of Justice request, and that it was the Department of Justice who was the one that made the request. These memos really undercut that. I think there is now growing evidence that suggests Ross may have perjured himself, lying in front of Congress here. The Attorney General of New York is saying that this is astonishing and unprecedented conduct for a cabinet member. She wants to depose Wilbur Ross as a part of a suit that gets underway in just a few weeks. And of course, here the stakes couldn't be higher. We talk about, you mentioned being a believer in.
Did I lose you? I guess we lost him. To me, it sounds like he absolutely did perjure himself, and it's kind of remarkable to me that that it isn't in the front page of the news, and it's not something that we're being shown at every opportunity. Just amazing stuff. It's just quite remarkable to me. I guess we got Luke back on the line. So finish this up. You were saying that, I'm a believer in, I'm assuming you were going to tariffs. Where'd that end up? Yeah, I guess his line is completely done. That's very bizarre. Anyway, we're going to move along. Luke, I appreciate the time, man. Good talking with you. But, it's one of these things that, you got to ask the question, what are they doing over there and why aren't they holding someone accountable? Just amazing, amazing stuff. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
For and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show. Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1830. That was the day the first locomotive built in the U.S. raced a horse on a 9-mile course in Maryland. Here is part of John Latrobe's eyewitness account of that historic race. At first, the gray had the best of it, for his steam would be applied to the greatest advantage on the instant, while the engine had to wait until the rotation of the wheels set the blower to work. The horse was perhaps a quarter of a mile ahead when the safety valve of the engine lifted and the thin blue vapor issuing from it showed an excess of steam. The blower whistled, the steam blew off in vapory clouds. The pace increased, the passengers shouted. The engine gained on the horse. Soon it lapped him. The race was neck and neck. Then the engine passed the horse. But it was not repeated. For just at this time, the band which drove the pulley and blower slipped from the drum. The safety valve ceased to scream, and the engine began to wheeze and pant. The horse gained on the machine and passed it, and although the band was presently replaced, the steam again did its best. The horse was too far ahead to be overtaken, and came in the winner of the race. The horse may have won the race that day, but the iron horse would soon revolutionize transportation. The railway industry also played an integral part in labor union history. From the early railroad worker brotherhoods to Eugene V. Debs's American Railway Union to A. Philip Randolph's Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, railroads and the workers who built them and ran them helped to build and strengthen the American labor movement.
I've been working on the railroad all the live long day.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. You fascists are bound to lose.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So have you seen this story? There was a viral video of this gentleman on a subway car in New York who was shaving in his seat. And, as I saw the video, I'll tell you, my first thought was this gentleman's homeless. And this is just his way of attempting to have some bit of dignity, some bit of humanity, some bit of where you go, he's just trying to feel normal. And I didn't know the backstory, and that was my assumption and this is one of those moments where you go, when you look at social media and you look at the responses that people made and the kind of vitriol and the kind of cruelty that people showed towards this man in the comments that they made, I guess it shouldn't surprise, shouldn't shock, and I'm beyond all of that. But it just shows the lack of humanity, if you will. And I guess how we view the world. We have no idea what this guy's gone through. We have no idea where he was going, what he was doing. All you know is at this moment, this gentleman was attempting to shave. And look, I've done the play homeless thing for a bit. We used to do this event, Hungry and Homeless, for the holidays, where we lived in a parking lot for a week and a half to raise food and money for the homeless and for the food banks. And in meeting people who were going through the crisis of being homeless, you quickly understand that the things that we take for granted, like washing your hands or brushing your teeth or shaving, are real challenges. Because guess what? Nobody wants you in their establishments. They're never going to let you use the bathrooms. And this whole thing, if you want to use our bathroom, you got to buy something. Well, if you're homeless and broke, good luck on that. And oh, by the way, no sleeping, you shiftless, lazy bum, you. Which is why even in the sleepy little town that I live in, they wanted to put dividers on the benches so people wouldn't lay down. How cruel and obscene is that? But here's the thing: this guy, was the story we now find out is the guy was homeless. A brother had given him some money to take the subway out to another brother in New Jersey, to where maybe there was going to be a place for this gentleman to stay. And you got some of the backstory about this guy's life. Look, he's had some horrible things happen, has made some poor choices, obviously, but he's still fighting. He's still struggling to make it. And the fact that he in this moment where he was videotaped and his privacy completely and totally invaded, was attempting to prepare himself in a way that would make him more presentable to someone, it just tells me that there's still a little bit of pride left inside of him, even if society wants to rip that away from him. And the reason that I bring this up is a friend of the show, Jordan Ewell, has gone and started a GoFundMe page. As of now, you're looking at he's trying to raise $20,000 for this guy to get on his feet, to get him an apartment, a place to live. And I hope people will check out the GoFundMe.com/Anthony Torrance Assistance Fund, Anthony Torres Assistance Fund, so that maybe you throw him $5 or $10 to help him get on his feet, and to help someone out and show the world that what, there is still a little bit of humanity left. There's still some decency left in society, and just we're not all cruel. It's not all cruel like this. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com, that's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email at thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until